Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So we're back with more 11.2 news roundup stuff. I know this is starting to come out a little bit later, but fuck it, I'm doing it anyways. Sorry, dropping an F-bomb within the first 2 minutes of the video. It's gonna get demonetized, whatever. Anyways, so I did a video on the monk changes. I've got more class change videos coming here over the next little bit, hopefully most of this week, as this one comes out Monday morning, as I record Sunday morning. Excuse me. So today I wanted to talk about all of the news that we've gotten so far about Season 3 Mythic Plus. Now, a lot of this stuff is already out there, but I just wanted to give more of my thoughts on this. So we're going to start with one that I think is the one that is probably the most important news. What dungeons are we doing? So they did go ahead and reveal the full Season 3 rotation here. Let me blow this up just slightly so you can see it. And Season 3 is going to be a combination of 4 dungeons that were voted on by the community, 2 from Season 1, 2 from Season 2, and then a new dungeon apparently, and then 3 dungeons returning from the Shadowlands expansion. Now, a lot of people are very down on Shadowlands. I'm actually not. I actually think the Shadowland dungeon pool is amazing, believe it or not. Small tweaks that can be done to make every boss a little bit better, to make some dungeons a little more quality of life, and I think we have one of the greatest dungeon pools of all time. So, the 4 community voted on here were Dawnbreaker and Arakara City of Echoes in Season 1, Floodgate and Prior of the Sacred Flame from Season 2. Now, if you are someone that pays attention to things like the loot tables, you'll notice that all 4 of these dungeons have a common theme. They all have very good trinkets. Dawnbreaker has the empowering crystal that's a lot of casters and a couple of ranged hunter specs like. Arakara obviously has sack brood, which is good for everyone that likes haste in some form or fashion. Floodgate has the pacemaker trinket, which is good for any specs that like crit. So just think of the ones that I play: Arms Warrior, Brewmaster Monk, things like that. Prior to the Sacred Flame has the Tome of Light's Devotion, which is a very, very powerful tank trinket. And then it also has Signet of the Priory, which is a universal good trinket for DPS healers and tanks as well. So if you're in dungeons, you're going to be farming trinkets out of these 4 dungeons, most likely, unless the loot tables for the other 4 here are strong as well. So that's my feeling on it. I think some people thought that these were kind of, quote, the easiest keys, which is funny because Arakara, Floodgate, and Prior of the Sacred Flame had the lowest completion rates in their seasons so far. Dawnbreaker had a really high completion rate, but I think it's mostly that people looked at this and said, oh, there was a really good trinket that was best for my class. I'm going to go vote for that one. I don't agree. I mean, I don't necessarily enjoy Floodgate. I did a tier list video that I don't think I ever released, or it's on my Patreon, that puts Floodgate as very much a C tier dungeon. It has potential, but it needs a lot of changes. Maybe they make them, and if so, Season 3 Floodgate could go down as very strong dungeons. Priory, I love. They need to make some small tweaks to it, but I love that dungeon being in there. Echoes and Dawnbreaker, I could care less. I really could care less. I don't think about the loot tables as much when it comes to dungeon pools. Like, yeah, it's kind of important, but I think about like how much fun I'm going to have because I'm going to be running these keys hundreds of times. And how much fun is it to do the dungeon? I don't think Dawnbreaker is actually all that good of a dungeon. It's super gimmicky with its flight mechanics. If you don't use... they need to fix the bug where you just fall through the fucking ship. And Arakara City of Echoes was a dungeon that was much like a Taldazar when they brought it back. It was completely free up until you got to the last boss, and then you could literally spend 20 minutes on the last boss. I've had many Echoes runs that had 12 to 15 minutes left on the key when we got to the last boss, and we didn't time it because that last boss was so punishing. Again, opportunities for some tweaking and some tuning to happen here, but the impression that City of Echoes left on me was never good. Now, what's the other half of the dungeon pool? So Echo Dome Aldani is a new dungeon. So this is the first expansion since Legion, or maybe even since WoD, but they've definitely not since Legion have they released 2 dungeons that were not a mega dungeon. So we got Karazhan in Legion, we got Mechagon in BFA, we got Tazavesh, as we see here in Shadowlands, and then we got Dawn of the Infinite in Dragonflight. Here we've got an Operation Floodgate and Echo Dome Aldani, which I'm assuming are very, very different themes, so they can't even necessarily be tied together as a mega dungeon. I actually like this. I'm not the biggest fan of mega dungeons. Tazavesh to me is a standout in a desert. Like Mechagon is okay, but I think Karazhan, the new Karazhan, I'm gonna get scorched for this, but the new Karazhan in Legion is garbage. And maybe that's because I have rose-tinted glasses from what the original Karazhan was, because I played it when it was released back in TBC. I'm that fucking old. But Upper and Lower Karazhan, as it was in Legion, was awful. And Dawn of the Infinites was just like, it had potential. It was very cool from a story and lore standpoint. Had some very cool effects. I love the Chronomancer sound effects that we see that now Preservation Evoker does a lot with. I think that gets revival. I like those sound effects, but like the dungeon mechanically was just kind of eh. Halls of Atonement is back. This is one that has been asked for a lot by people that play a ton of Mythic Plus. I thought Halls was a good dungeon. I actually think the one that's in Revendreth with it, Sanguine Depths, is better. But I don't mind Halls. The big thing about Halls of Atonement is that you did all of the work in the first 20 minutes of the first 20 minutes of the dungeon, and then you did boss, which a lot of people like. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. Things like Encrypted really fixed a lot of the problems that I had with the dungeon. And from what I understand in early data mining is that the mobs that you would be able to invis skip going from first boss to second boss, like you skipped almost that entire trash pack. They all have True Sight now, so you can't even do that. So we're going to have to adjust how we pull in that dungeon, or they're going to have to increase the count required and thus increase the timer. I don't know. We'll have to see. Testing schedules, we'll talk about in just a second. And then Tazavesh. I'm on the record, of course, I think Tazavesh is the greatest mega dungeon ever. I actually really like both of these dungeons. Streets of Wonder, a lot of people don't necessarily like the marketplace area because it's just kind of slow for no reason. I actually think that there's a lot of interesting ways that you can handle that area that are quite fun, and when you come up with those good strategies, it's great because you can backfill some trash count while you're also doing this event. You can go activate the RP for like other bosses while you're doing this event. Like there's all sorts of things that are able to do that while you're doing this event. You just speed up other aspects of the dungeon. So I really love Streets of Wonder, and the last boss, Solia, is one of the most fun dungeon bosses I think that they've ever made. I love that boss. And then Solia's Gambit is going to be really, really interesting to see. If they make very few changes to that first area of Gambit, I think you're looking at one of the best potentials for A, routing, and B, just insanity pulls. Now, obviously, classes that are super uncapped are going to be there, so I don't know if Blizzard's going to want that overall long term, but I could see things like Destro Lock, Frost Mage, even something like Evoker, which technically is capped, but Firestorm just does so much. Devastation Evoker with a VDH, of course, because you got to improve the spell power, and then like a Resto Druid just to keep them all alive. I could see something like that just being like, this would be the ultimate Wizard Cleave dungeon, even though, in my opinion, the rest of the dungeon doesn't lend itself well to those classes, because it's a lot. Once you get past the first area, it's a lot of smaller pulls, like a couple of big pulls going to the dragon, and then the last area, there's a lot of small pulls because some of those mobs are just so fucking deadly, you can't chain them. So I think for that, like smaller AoE classes are going to shine there, but in that first area is going to be the area that everyone remembers with the Murlocs. Either way, it's a three boss dungeon. Echo of Aldani is a 3-boss dungeon. Halls of Atonement's a 3-boss dungeon. So you're seeing a pattern here. We've got quite, and Prior of Sacred Flame, technically a 3-boss dungeon. Lots of 3-boss dungeons here. You know, Arakara is 4 bosses. No, actually, Arakara City of Echoes is 3 bosses. Because it's Spider, it's Nerubian, and then it's the last boss. Floodgate is 4 bosses with Swamp Face Duo, Big Mama, and Giesel. Prior is 3 with Dalecry, Brawn Pike, and Murprey. Aldani's only 3. Halls of Atonement is 3 with the Construct, the Bloodseeker guy, and then the last boss. Streets of Wonder is 4 bosses because you have the first one with the that does all like the whirlwinds and the caging. You have Mailbox boss. You have the streets of the market into the band boss, and then you have Celia. I think Gambit's only 3, so a lot of 3 boss dungeons here, which is a pretty popular thing with a lot of people. No 5 bosses, no Theater of Pain type dungeons here, even though I don't mind Theater of Pain. So all good. I love this rotation. I'm very curious to see what they do with the first section of Gambit. They need to make some tweaks in Atonement, I think, and I'm very curious to see what they do with Aldani. This dungeon, the last boss, really is the only thing that needs to be touched. Here they need to fix some of the bugs with the flying mechanics. Here they need to probably do something with Sacred Toll on the Paladins. I think that's really the only thing. Although I've heard early reports that Dale Cry, the first boss, no longer does the big red line because it was buggy as hell. And Floodgate just needs polish. I think that's the big thing. So if they do the right things with these 4 dungeons, and then these dungeons get just the right tweaks, I've called Season 2 of The War Within the best Mythic Plus season ever. This can definitely compete with it from a how fun is it to do the dungeon standpoint. Not from the loot table standpoint. There were some obvious gaps in the loot tables this season, and I worried about this having pretty obvious gaps in the loot tables. But I'm really excited about this season's dungeon pool. So when can we play them? So they've got raid testing coming up, Maniforge Omega. I don't really talk about raid a ton because it's not the thing that I really care about. I do raid so that I can Mythic Plus better, and because I like playing with the people that I play with. Dungeon testing. So we're going to get Echo Dome Aldani testing. This starts on this upcoming reset, so I'll probably find time to play that. I am going to do a long Final Fantasy into probably a raid stream on Thursday, but Friday I could do a PTR stream because I'm off work those days. But I also need to prep for the D&D one-shot that I'm running as my birthday gift to me from my family. So first week, all we're going to do is get Echo Dome Aldani, so may not see a ton there. And then we're going to see these 4 dungeons, the War Within dungeons. And then we get our Legacy dungeons, including Tazavesh Hard Mode, which is coming back. And then they're going to combine everything for the next 6 weeks. So we know this PTR is going to be at least 6 weeks long, which if we're looking at the calendar, starts here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which means at earliest we're looking at August 5th as a potential release date. So yeah, I'll probably spend a lot of time testing. Like, it's summer, things in retail WoW have kind of fallen off a little bit. I'm usually not one that likes to go in and do PTR testing, but with Brewmaster being changed quite a bit, Prot Warrior being changed quite a bit, which are the 2 tanks that I'm looking at possibly playing the most of this upcoming season, I definitely want to get in there and figure out exactly what's going to be comfortable for me. And maybe this helps me narrow down a main choice earlier in the season. Who knows? So yeah, so we're going to get these breakdowns. So week 1 will probably be a lot of people doing Echo Dome, probably not seeing a lot of PTR play, but weeks 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, you're going to see a ton of people playing those keys all the damn time, and we'll get to see what we get to. All right. This was another one that came out that is caused a lot of conversation. Having access to Shadow Meld in Season 3 Mythic Plus using a new potion. It's called Umbra Essentro, which basically is Shadow Meld. And the duration lasts based on that. So basically the developer note on this is that we're adding a new potion in Ghost of Caress that replicates abilities such as the Night Elf Racial Shadow Meld to address its prevalence in high-end Mythic Plus play. As a large number of top-performing groups rely on Shadow Meld for certain strategies, we're looking to offer access to that utility without being locked to a specific race, with the goal of reducing the pressure on group composition. So this is going to open up things like Evokers now can start to do some of these Shadow Meld skips. Paladins can do some of these Shadow Meld skips. Races that Night Elves cannot, or classes that Night Elves cannot be. Shaman, I believe, now in that mix. So it just opens up the window for it if you're someone that plays at that level. Now, I don't play any Night Elves, and I don't care about doing Shadow Meld skips. But if you're someone that is playing a class where you just like the fantasy of your Blood Elf Paladin, you now can get Shadow Meld. Or if you're a Horde player in general and don't like to play, Alliance characters because you have a love of the Horde, which, no offense, I'm an Alliance lover, so I get it. I have Horde characters, but I always love the Alliance more. You now get to be able to play your Horde race and still get access to this powerful utility. The question now becomes is, do they do the same for the Dwarven racials? Stone Meld and whatever the Dark Iron Dwarf one is called. Because being able to remove debuffs off of yourself as a racial on top of any class abilities that you have is going to become very powerful. I don't think this is going to alleviate a lot of the problems. It's just going to shift them. So yes, you have more classes that Night Elves can't be, can now obviously do these skips. But now it's what classes can Dwarves not be that are also now going to be punished because they don't have access to Fireblood or to Stone Meld. That's where the next step of problems comes in. And really the problem that Blizzard is trying to address, this is a band-aid. They should really rethink racial abilities in general to make them, I think, much more cosmetic or out of combat. They should not, racials to me should not affect your combat. Like, think about, for example, Kultiran, I think are great. Haymaker is a very niche use combat ability that actually pulls you out of combat, I think. So it's like not very good, but like everything else that they have other than like a small stat boost, but they get things like better swim speed and longer breath because they are Mariner culture. They get, small boosts to every single profession. Things like that to me are things that are really, really fun about racials that you could leverage in small different ways. Like Panda's taking less fall damage. It's A, kind of funny. B, makes sense. Like, do things like that with these classes and in these races instead of giving them very powerful. Like, I'm also not a fan of things like Berserking. I'm not a fan of things like War Stomp. I'm not a fan of, obviously, Fireblood, Shadow Meld. Light of the Naru makes sense from a thematic standpoint, but you can't make it too powerful. Otherwise, you just now give everyone a free heal that is very powerful. I don't like Shadow Meld. Things like that. Like, even human racials are a lot better now that they don't have... Well, Diplomacy getting removed kind of sucked, but Double Hearthstone, like, that's fun utility. Getting Perception you could probably do something with and get rid of it, but, like, giving them slightly more resources, like, that's not game-breaking in the grand scheme of things. You look at things like Vulpera, they have the ability to set up camp, so you can... Like, Vulpera Shaman can teleport almost as much as mages can. I like things like that. Even the Magyar Orc racial that gives you a bunch of your stats. Like, I don't like that. Or make something that's a little bit more universal. But Blizzard is very, very afraid of homogenization. I know this has become a real talking point in the Final Fantasy XIV community, is that everything is pretty much the same. And so that distinct differentiation between... a Dragoon and a Dancer is getting harder and harder to tell, other than the fact that one stands close and one doesn't. So, I'm not a big fan of this change. I still think it's pretty niche. I also don't think it resolves the issue of Shadow Meld being ridiculously powerful, and I think it only now shifts the focus onto things like the Dwarven racials. That said, we do get a new Keystone Master mount and a new Keystone Legend mount. So this is going to be for KSM. This is the Azure Flyer. So very Void. You're going to see a lot of very, very, very Void themes, obviously, with things like Koresh and Dementius and Azure Walker being involved. Illyria is involved heavily in this story, you bet. So obviously, and just from the little bit of PTR that I've done where I've walked around Tazavesh, spoiler, being moved over to Koresh. Beautiful. I'm very excited about it. And then this is the Keystone Legend mount, which is the Scarlet Void Flyer, which, the biggest differences here are just some coloration on the legs and the body, giving a little bit of more of that red and blue tint, whereas this is more of like a purple and blue tint. This is more like a maroon, pinkish, fuchsia one here. So, my opinion is that I think these are fine. I think they're better than the mech suits that we've gotten. I'm not a big fan of the mech suits. I wear them just so that I can show off that I've gotten KSL. That's the big thing. Excuse me. I'll be curious to see how they fly. That to me is always something that, like, people look at them and they think, oh, these are cool just to sit around on. Like, to me, because I love skywriting so much, how they fly is important to me, which is why I use things like smaller mounts. Like, I very rarely do big mounts because it just feels clunky to me trying to fly around on them, which is why I don't use like almost any dragons. Like, I love the smaller mounts. And this one does look like it'll be a smaller in terms of its size on your screen, so I'm curious to see how it flies. And then finally, we're getting this Mythic Plus Deserter system that's coming in Season 3. So this one we're going to talk a little bit about, but I want to talk about this here. So Keystone Deserter system. So the rough summary from Drew, who's one of the developers that's been working on this, as they continue to flesh out information, is that you will need to put up an abandon vote essentially on a dungeon if things aren't working well, and if the group agrees, you disband. Then there's no harm, no foul to your rating or anything like that. If you are leaving keys too often in this first iteration, they're not going to penalize you on an account level. You'll just be marked as someone who leaves group often. So in Group Finder, you're going to see this player. You're going to see that this player quits. That said, if you're on good behavior and you're finishing keystones or using the abandoned system appropriately, you'll lose that mark as well. First iteration, we're going to be taking a bunch of feedback, but we do view this as a problem. We want to build a tool for players to agree that once the key is over and punish players who suddenly vanish. So basically, this is going to address something that happens a lot in pickup groups where someone does a pull, say like you wipe on the first pull, and someone's like just straight up just quits the group. You wipe on the very first pull of a dungeon. I've experienced that a lot. I've seen that a lot. Admittedly, I've done that a few times. I usually don't give it on the first pull. I usually give it like 3 or 4. And then if things are still going poorly, yeah, I've dipped out. I'll be honest. But there are people out there that, like, if you even get one death, they leave. And it's crazy to me. And it kills groups, obviously, because most keys, especially like keys in like the 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 range, even, I've seen groups 4-man it. I've done that. We've 4-manned it because, frankly, like, the damage checks and stuff like that aren't good. And if you remove a player, like, one group was really funny. The player was the one dying all the time and then was blaming everyone else. And when we were just like, dude, like, you're standing and stuff, he just quit. We 4-manned the key. Yes, that player technically gets credit for it, but we all reported. But we 4-manned the key, and it went smoother than it was when we had a 5th player there. Like, you just have stuff like that happens. But as you get higher and higher, like, you know, my warm-up keys are basically 10s or 12s now. You can't 4-man those and time it. You're not. It's not going to happen. And so you have basically a set of players that the moment something goes wrong in these high keys, you're like, oh, timer's dead. We're moving. We're leaving. And they just leave the key, even though the truth is that you probably could still time it if you just kind of locked in and played somewhat clean the rest of the way. You see it a lot on things like where people try to do the big pull of Cinderbrew Meadery, and they just get destroyed. You chain deaths. People leave after that. But like the reality is that, yeah, if you have less than like 15 deaths on that, and as long as you play clean the rest of the dungeon and move somewhat speedy, you can actually still time a Cinderbrew. Like, I timed a Cinderbrew last night on a 12 that had 14 deaths, and we had 4 minutes left. Like, if you do enough damage, like, you can just overcome your death timer. So I like that they're doing this. We'll have to be very, very careful about how it gets implemented. We'll have to be obviously give a lot of feedback to it over time, which means that hopefully they implement it on PTR where you can like play with it, and then you just have someone that like takes a character that they don't really want to test in keys. They just go into like 12s and like leave after like the first few minutes, and they just do that a bunch of times and see what happens. I'd love to see if there's a way to test that on PTR. Overall, I think this is going to be a good thing, because if you have someone that signs up to your key and they have the tag, hey, leaves the key a lot, it sorts out and makes your quality of life better, because you don't have to worry about, like, as someone that does a lot of pugging, like, the number one worry that I have really when I pug anything higher than like anything it's like 10 or above particularly, is that people are going to just dip at the first sign of trouble. In lower keys, this is actually not the case a lot of the times, because a lot of people realize you can kind of brute force your way through the timer deaths, and 5 seconds off the timer is not bad. especially at 12s though. I pugged a few 12s, ooh, where the 15-second comes into play. And people leave the key very, very quickly when there's 15 seconds of death timer, and they think they know exactly how much time they need in order to kill the dungeon. That said, a lot of this stems from the fact that there's a 15 fucking second death timer. Like, this is dumb. Get rid of it. It's dumb. Anyways, overall, I'll be curious to see how this gets tested and go from there. So, what are my thoughts on Season 3 without taking into factor, like, all of the class changes? Overall, I'm actually really excited. The mounts look cool. I will say that. Not my favorite style, but I think they do look cool. They fit the theme of the patch very well. The dungeon pool looks amazing. And if Blizzard can do the right tweaks that I think are needed to 7 of those dungeons, obviously Aldani we don't know anything about yet. But 7 of those dungeons, they all need just very, very small tweaks to be like really, really fun keys. And if they can do that, then I'm very much in. Already, I mean, not so much being in means I'm in. But like, there's a chance that Season 3 could top Season 2, especially if the loot table stuff is corrected, where there's like no neck items and everyone was forced to craft a neck, which, hey, great for crafters, but kind of shitty for everyone else. So I'm very excited about the dungeon pool. The Shadow Meld thing, it's not going to impact me a ton, I don't think, even if I'm playing something like Evoker, because my group just doesn't do a lot of Shadow Meld skips, and we're doing 13s and stuff like that just fine. Obviously, I'll probably be messing around with the testing schedule as much as I can because I want to see how the changes to Brewmaster work and the changes to Prot Warrior work. And this penalty, I think it's going to be good, especially if you do a lot of pugging. I think if you do a lot of pugging, it's going to be really good. Now, in the higher level keys, like you're talking the 16 pluses, a lot of that stuff is a networking community thing, like people know. And eventually that person gets ostracized. But for people in like the lower key range or that are pugging like weekly 12s or whatever because you're trying to get all 12s done for your dinars, whatever the case may be, this is going to improve your quality of life quite a bit. So I'm curious how it's going to work. But as someone that does play with a lot of pre-made groups, I will probably be faced with this a little bit less than what others do, but I'm still intending to pug quite a bit next season, just because I know the flow of gameplay that I see amongst my friends. So, early positive thoughts on Season 3. Obviously, we'll get into the testing aspect and really see what's going on. But at least on paper, I like what they're doing. So, yeah, I'm curious. I'm excited. And I think that's the best thing Blizzard can ask for, is having a player excited to try out a mode of their game. So, till the next video, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you're enjoying yourselves, you're having fun, you keep on gaming, and that you're okay, that you're mentally okay. It is Men's Mental Health Month. Those of you that are part of the Pride, I love you and support you and see you. See you next time.